Pre-roll off camera for Monday, October 9, the 5th day of the feast. We're going live on Sabbath.tv and Facebook Live. Greetings to those of you watching on Sabbath.tv and greetings to those of you on Facebook Live. We're picking up, as I said we'd do yesterday, right where we left off in the 1985 Feast of Tabernacles film. So we're going to roll with that. We'll be back with another one from 1981, right after, that'll immediately follow the conclusion of the 1985 Behind the Work video or film. Here we go, brethren.
Mr. Armstrong has enjoyed a warm friendship with Thailand's hard-working King Bhumibol and Queen Sirikit. He has been impressed with their outstanding example of service to their people. Since 1971, the Ambassador Foundation has aided their majesties in projects to encourage the hill tribes to replace the opium poppy with a more profitable and less destructive cash crop. In a visit to Thailand in 1984, Mr. Armstrong was invited by Queen Sirikit to fly with her in the royal helicopter to a remote hill tribe settlement close to the border between Thailand and Burma. The Queen showed Mr. Armstrong the progress that had been made in helping these backward people develop a more settled and prosperous standard of living. Knowing Her Majesty's dedication to helping Thailand's poor while preserving their heritage, Mr. Armstrong assisted her in promoting a greater knowledge of fine quality Thai handicrafts. The Ambassador Television Studios produced an hour-long documentary which told the story of King Bhumibol and Queen Sirikit's total dedication to their people. Mr. Armstrong personally presented their majesties with this videotape production. The royal family has honored Mr. Armstrong several times, decorating him in recognition of his long friendship and service to the Thai nation.
Thank you, Your Majesty.
A highlight in the long and productive relationship came in March 1985 when Her Majesty accepted Mr. Armstrong's invitation to visit Ambassador College for several days. Mr. Armstrong escorted the Queen on a personal tour of the college's beautiful Pasadena campus. Queen Sirikit also attended a number of banquets and receptions in her honor. Present were many state and local dignitaries.
So I think Mr. Armstrong and my husband have the same goal, the common goal, that is the harmony, the world harmony, and better understanding between people in all over the world.
In conjunction with her visit, the largest display of ancient and modern Thai treasures ever exhibited outside of Thailand was showcased in the lobby of the Hall of Administration. Later, on the stage of the Ambassador Auditorium, Mr. Armstrong introduced Queen Sirikit to an audience of distinguished businessmen and leaders of the local community.
Ladies and gentlemen, and before I introduce Her Majesty, the Queen of Thailand, I'd like to say a few things about the royal family of Thailand. Their Majesties, the King and Queen of Thailand, have devoted their lives to the welfare of their people, to serving them. They go out among them personally. I spent one day with Her Majesty, the Queen, among one of their nomad tribes in the north. And their Majesties are interested in going up and working with them. So now it's my very great pleasure to introduce a very dear and affectionate friend, Her Majesty, Queen Sirikit of Thailand.
I'm very happy today to visit the home base of Mr. Armstrong, a gentleman whom I consider to be my true personal friend, as well as a friend of all men of goodwill in this world. Because of his wisdom, far-sightedness, and humanitarian heart, he knows it is meaningless to talk about security, democracy, and international cooperation when a large number of people still hardly have enough to keep body and soul together. I know that his financial aid to various projects has been extremely generous, but I think that he is most appreciated because of the spiritual impact he makes. To those who meet him, he is the symbol of the warm-hearted citizen of the advanced countries who is willing to understand, give encouragement, and lend a helping hand when needed.
If the people of the world are ever to reach their full potential, it is important that the educated in all nations learn to cooperate and serve those less fortunate than themselves. The United Nations has been the most successful instrument for international cooperation so far. In the closing days of World War II, representatives of 51 nations met in San Francisco to lay the foundations of an organization that they hoped would once and for all provide a forum where nations could work out their differences at the conference table rather than on the battlefield. It is in many ways the most effective vehicle that man has ever devised to improve communication between nations. But in spite of dedicated and sincere effort, the United Nations has been unable to keep the peace. In June 1985, representatives of the world's nations gathered once again in San Francisco to commemorate the 40th anniversary of the United Nations. Delegates reviewed 40 years of achievement and considered the future of the World Organization. Mr. Armstrong had reported the 1945 conference for The Plain Truth. Today, he has met with more heads of state and leaders of government than any other man alive. He was afforded a position of honor during the days of discussion and debate.
If you asked me, what does the United Nations need most? More power or more money or both? My answer would be, the United Nations needs above all the love, the understanding, the interest, and the support of the peoples of all nations.
The hardest thing for human beings to do is to set lofty goals and work hard for them, while recognizing that they may never be fully realized. Yet this is what the United Nations is really all about. The failure of the United Nations to meet all its lofty aims is no cause for despair. We should continue to set high goals that inspire us to work harder and to persevere.
It is said, according to United Nations studies, that we've had 154 conventional wars since 1945, fought on 71 countries, on the ground of 71 countries, with over 20 million people dead. It continues, even at this moment in time, at a measured loss of life of 1,000 people a day, 30,000 a month, ad infinitum. What would we do without the United Nations Forum on Arms Control and Disarmament? It is entirely possible that without it, the doomsday clock would already have struck midnight. Perhaps we can meet here again in San Francisco, 40 years from now, in the year 2025. And in the interim, because of the tireless work which is done, sanity may have intervened, and we will then be at a conference discussing a convention on the control of the proliferation of plowshares and pruning hooks.
As one who has devotedly sat on the sidelines of the Security Council for nearly 40 years, perhaps I may be forgiven for saying that there are moments, or have been moments and still are, when I feel that only an invasion from outer space is likely to reintroduce to the Security Council that spirit of unanimity and collegiate responsibility which the authors of the Charter were talking about. I sincerely hope I may be proved to be wrong.
UNESCO, the UN has...
Only 3 of the original signers of the United Nations Charter are alive today. They were invited to attend the commemoration conference and speak to the delegates.
We who came together in those early days of the UN know that the most and certainly the best we could do at that time was to build the foundation. We can pride ourselves that the foundation is still intact. But the structure of a genuine peace has yet to be built. This is the continuing challenge for all those who understand that the human race cannot survive in a condition of world anarchy.
It's not enough for the young generation to say we do not want a nuclear war. That's obvious. But if there is to be peacekeeping, there must be peacemaking. And the United Nations needs a tremendous expansion in the way in which solutions are worked out and brought forward.
When we look ahead to the years of peace, we find that distressingly little is being contemplated to be done in this conference in the realm of the mind and spirit. It is to the spirit and mind of man, to his ideas and his attitudes, that we must devote considerable attention if the peace is going to be truly won. Unless we secure the right conditions for spiritual and intellectual health, and unless we determine the right positive ideas for which man should live, I am afraid all our work in this conference may prove to have been in vain. Have this particular...
After his speech, Dr. Malik privately discussed with Mr. Armstrong what he considered to be the missing dimension in the philosophy of the United Nations representatives.
There is an old wisdom in the Middle East with which we are fully acquainted. You know, history began in the Middle East. I mean, the history of the Western world began in the Middle East, in Mesopotamia and Egypt, on the shores of Lebanon, the Phoenicians, then in Jerusalem, and so forth. One of the basic things that you find everybody believes in, everybody without exception, in every village in Lebanon, in every village in Egypt, everywhere. One of the fundamental things which nobody talks about here, because now you have, with all respect for you, now you have outgrown this old wisdom of the Middle East. One of the important things that we talk about is the devil. I'd like to see one man speak of the devil. Now, the devil has penetrated human hearts everywhere. In your heart, sir, and in mine, the devil is contending with Christ all the time. He's contending with him in all sorts of ways. I can reveal them to you at length. So we believe that the devil is at work in the midst of all these events, and while the devil is at work and has not yet been completely conquered, vanquished, we will never have peace. We will never have peace. You think the United Nations is going to bring about peace so long as the devil is around? We had 1,000 people today at lunch, more than 1,000, maybe 1,500. I was sitting down and thinking all the time, Mr. Armstrong, all the time, what is going on in the minds of these people? Mm-hmm. Well, I'm not sure the devil was not there in the minds of these people. I'm not sure at all. With all their schemes and ideas and emotions and aspirations and plannings and all kinds of things. The devil is at work. So this is a thing that if you ask anybody, any peasant in Lebanon or in Egypt will tell you, of course the devil is at work. The devil is at work. But here, the devil has so much conquered you that you don't talk about him. You wouldn't dare talk about him. I didn't say conquered you. This is the wrong way of putting it. But he is so clever that one way with which he acts is to conceal himself.
Today, few people realize that this is Satan's world. As Satan's rule of this earth draws nearer to the end, it becomes increasingly important for an ambassador of the kingdom of God to reach many nations with the warning of tribulation and the promise of peace. There is a special urgency in reaching the nations of the industrial world, for the prophecies show that it is these nations that will trigger the crisis that catapults the human race into the final trial. Since the end of the Second World War, Europe has known 40 years of peace, one of the longest periods without war in this continent's stormy history. After the destruction of the war, the nations have rebuilt. Behind the scenes, patient, cautious men have been working for future prosperity and the fulfillment of an old dream, a United States of Europe. Because of Europe's critical role in the fulfillment of prophecy, Mr. Armstrong has kept in contact with these architects of a united Europe. Such a man is Dr. Otto von Hapsburg, son of the last Austrian emperor and a leading member of the European Parliament.
Dr. Hapsburg, yeah. I wonder if you can bring me up to date a little bit on the progress of the unification project here in Europe.
I will tell you, we have, of course, made a major breakthrough with the enlargement. With the accession of Spain and Portugal, this was a major breakthrough. You see, I have a little bit directly to do with it, since I'm the first vice president of the mixed committee between the European Parliament and the Spanish Cortes. So I was in the negotiations.
When Europe starts uniting, which will be the strongest body, the European Parliament or what will be the strongest?
I hope it will be balanced. I think there is a fair chance of it being balanced. You see, I wouldn't be happy about any of the powers being too strong. They should all be checking each other, because if a power runs away with too much of influence, it's always dangerous. You know, it's like in a state, it's the same thing. The checks and balances are something very important to keep freedom.
Leaders like Dr. von Hapsburg plan for a united Europe that will be a powerful force for peace and democracy in the world. The birthplace of European democracy was ancient Greece. The Apostle Paul once proclaimed the true gospel to the superstitious inhabitants of Athens. 2,000 years later, Mr. Armstrong confronted political leaders and businessmen in the Athens Rotary Club with the truth about the future of Europe.
Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. It certainly is a great honor to be able to speak to the Rotary Club here in Athens, Greece, one of the most ancient cities in the world and the home of education, scholarship, and culture, one of the oldest cultural cities in the world. I come to you as an unofficial ambassador for peace. Armies do not bring peace to a country. We have not learned the way to peace. Yesterday, I was having a meeting with some of the officials of your country, and there was considerable discussion about the plans for the unification of Europe. And as one of your officials said, world peace depends upon European unification. I want to tell you something more about the coming unification of Europe. We not only have language barriers between the nations and nationalism, different aspirations, and all that sort of thing, and differences which have to be overcome, but many of the political leaders feel that they do not want to be church-dominated, and yet they're not going to be able to get together without the cohesiveness of church domination and the church bringing them all together. You see, even the church is divided between East and West. I can tell you, however, that I fully believe that rift is going to be healed. And I fully believe that unification will be unexpectedly and suddenly achieved, and the whole world is going to be stunned and astounded when it is announced that there is, in the continent of Europe, a new political unification, a nation as great or greater than the Soviet Union or the United States of America.
Many listen respectfully, but they do not believe. The old nations of Europe are tired of war. They seek unification only for peaceful purposes. It is a bold dream, but the prophecies show that the union of the nations in Europe will result not in peace, but in the most terrible instrument of destruction the world has ever seen. The course of a united Europe was charted long ago in the days of the prophet Daniel, when the destiny of this world passed into the hands of 4 world-ruling empires. Daniel had seen 4 beasts representing those empires.
Then I wished to know the truth about the fourth beast. Thus he said, the fourth beast shall be a fourth kingdom on earth, which shall be different from all other kingdoms, and shall devour the whole earth, trample it, and break it in pieces. The 10 horns are 10 kings who shall arise from this kingdom.
And so God revealed that the fourth beast represented the fourth empire, which would continue in one form or another to the time of the end. Babylon fell to the Persian Empire in the 6th century BC. The Persians ruled the world for 2 centuries, until 333 BC, when the armies of Alexander destroyed Persia's power. This third empire, like unto a leopard, endured for nearly 3 more centuries before falling to the might of the Romans. And so, in 31 BC, the fourth beast was born as an empire, a power that would influence the affairs of the world until the second coming of Jesus Christ rescues mankind from its clutches. It was in the heyday of the first stage of the Roman Empire that Jesus Christ revealed the final details of its role in world history. On the Mediterranean island of Patmos, the elderly apostle John received the visions recorded in the Apocalypse or Book of Revelation. He saw in vivid detail a cataclysmic war that would take place at the end of the age. Against this backdrop of mayhem and destruction, John saw once again the savage beasts of Daniel's vision, now combined into one all-consuming monster.
Then I stood on the sand of the sea, and I saw a beast rising up out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and on his horns 10 crowns, and on his heads a blasphemous name. Now the beast which I saw was like a leopard. His feet were like the feet of a bear, and his mouth like the mouth of a lion. And the dragon gave him his power, his throne, and great authority. And all the world marveled and followed the beast. So they worshiped the dragon who gave authority to the beast. And they worshiped the beast, saying, who is like the beast? And who is able to make war with him?
Here, then, is a beast of fearsome proportion. The majesty of Babylon, the relentless force of Persia, the speed of the 4-headed leopard of Greece, all combined to produce the formidable military might of the Romans. The 10 horns represent 10 governments to be formed from this beast, for it would arise again and again, casting its terrible shadow across nearly 1,600 years of history. The old Roman Empire fell in AD 476. 3 kingdoms supplanted it: the Vandals, the Heruli, and the Ostrogoths. Then the Emperor Justinian restored the power of Imperial Rome in AD 554, as symbolized by the 4th horn of the beast. In AD 800, Charlemagne was crowned by the Pope on Christmas Day as a successor to the throne of Rome. In 962, the 6th horn became known as the Holy Roman Empire of the German nation, when Pope John XII crowned Otto the Great. Then, in 1530, the Hapsburg dynasty reached the apex of its power when the Pope crowned Charles V as the Holy Roman Emperor. This dynastic 7th horn lasted until it was overthrown by Napoleon, who, seizing the crown from the hands of the Pope, crowned himself emperor. Napoleon's short reign ended in 1814, a date recognized in history as the end of a government that lasted 1,260 years from the restoration of the Roman Empire in the West by Justinian. But the beast was not dead. By 1870, Garibaldi's efforts led to a united Italy, thus beginning a chain of events that resulted in the formation of the 9th government to arise out of the Roman Empire. In 1923, the fascists under Mussolini had already come to power in Rome. Meanwhile, an attempt by the Nazi Party to take over the German government was thwarted. But 10 years later, Hitler did rise to power, and his Third Reich was soon to lunge out at Europe and hold it captive for 5 nightmare years. Hitler drew inspiration from ancient Rome. Even his architecture was inspired by the styles of the Caesars. Before this 9th fearsome horn of the Roman Empire had been crushed in the ruins of fascism and the Third Reich, much of Europe had been reduced to rubble. "40 years later, there is little left to remind the visitors of the ravages of war. The place where Hitler once goaded his people into frenzy is now a park where old people stroll and children play. Close by, the review stand at Zeppelin Field, where the legions of the Third Reich paraded before their Führer, is now in ruins.
Hände gebe, die es in Deutschland gibt.
But it is not the end. The terrible beast must appear once more for a final rampage of destruction. The prophecies show that 10 nations, or group of nations in Europe, will join their economic, military, and political forces. It will be a fragile union, iron mixed with miry clay. But old rivalries and quarrels will be suspended for a time. Held together by a common need and a common faith, these nations will become a third superpower. It may at first seem to be a peaceful union, but the Bible reveals the true nature that lies beneath the surface. Goaded into action, the beast will wreak havoc on the earth. The armies of the beast will lash out, laying waste the modern-day descendants of the ancient house of Israel. Then the beast turns in its rage on the nations of the east. Finally, powerful armies gather to fight a climactic battle for Jerusalem. So great is the fury, so awful the weapons, that humanity teeters on the brink of destroying all flesh, man and animals alike, from off the earth. Only the intervention of God can save humanity. And God does intervene. Jesus Christ returns to earth in power and glory, stopping the fighting, subduing the adversaries, rescuing his chosen people from cruel tribulation. Then this world, this civilization that has known so much misery and destruction, will be over. Jesus Christ will establish his kingdom on the earth, which will lead the world into 1,000 years of peace. Leaders of nations will come to this kingdom, eager to be taught the way that leads to peace. They will come to a tranquil land, developing in happiness and prosperity, living in harmony with God and His laws. Many then will remember that in the last days of that past civilization, an ambassador of this kingdom came to them with the advance news of a peaceful world tomorrow.
And I'm here to announce to you tonight that God is going to let this world come crashing down. But it's going to be replaced with a far better world that'll be filled with love and with peace and joy and happiness and with greater production by far than anything we've dreamed of having yet, and where everybody will be well educated and rightly and properly educated. I feel the responsibility, and a voice has to cry out in this wilderness of religious confusion, this wilderness of a Babylon of ideas, and everybody having different ideas and everybody against everybody else. Someone has to cry out with that message and announce what is going to happen, as certain as the sun is going to rise and set tomorrow. Now, I know you haven't heard anything said like this before, but I have been sent here by that eternal living Creator God, the God over all races and all people and all nations, to tell you the truth, which missionaries have failed to tell you, which religions have not known and have not been able to tell you, which the colleges and universities do not teach, which science doesn't even understand. But you have been told tonight.
All right, brethren, good morning to you on this 5th day of the Feast of Tabernacles. Those behind the work films or videos, actually very touching, aren't they? When we look back and be able to see and understand what it is God has been doing through those whom He first of all beat down and then raised up. And the history of God's church, extremely interesting. We started out with that at the beginning of this week, and in this feast film today from 1985, in the last year before God allowed Mr. Armstrong to die, we can see the stage extremely set and where it is, and God delayed things, brethren. I think many of you, if you listen to me for any length of time, you know how I thump from 2 Peter 3 verses 8 and 9, how time for God is very different than what it is for man. With God saying in verse 8 of 2 Peter 3, brethren, saying through Peter to us, with Peter starting it out by saying, "But beloved brethren, be not ignorant of this one thing, that one day with the Lord is as 1,000 years, and 1,000 years as a day." Now that's more than just one of the Numbers 14:34 type other places where we understand the principle and prophecy of a day for a year, and one day in certain things is as 1,000 years, like the 7-day week is the 7,000-year plan of mankind. But it's more than that in this verse. It's also telling us that time, in relativity, time to God is very different than what it is for man. Because he goes on to say in verse 9, "The Lord is not slack concerning His promise." You know, God had enough, I guess you could call it forethought, to maybe know where we would be and what we would be thinking today, and what his plan would be, and how he's got to have this flexibility in working dynamically, not statically, but dynamically with those he calls, because he's put himself under an obligation when you read the rest of the verse. First of all, he says, God is not slack concerning concerning his promise, as some men count slackness. Some have been saying, well, Christ was supposed to return before now. Oh yeah? Who says so? Now listen, God's end-time apostle, even the early apostles in the Ephesian era thought Christ was going to return during their lifetime. That's what they initially thought. And otherwise, if you knew it was going to be a couple thousand years back in the Ephesian era before Christ would return, everybody would be saying, well, what's the big deal? What's the big urgency here? Christ's not coming back for a couple thousand years, so let's go fish. God didn't want him going fishing. He wanted the word spread and more people to be able to be called. And he wanted to set the example with those he gave extremely high office than those early apostles, except for John and a special love he had for the apostle John. All the rest of the apostles who rejected Christ while he was being crucified, Peter especially. Cock-a-doodle-doo, the cock won't crow twice before you've denied me thrice, Christ told Peter. And sure enough, as the cock crowed twice, Peter had just denied Christ for the third time. So God allows us this urgency, and we see it even now. But when we get down to the gun lap, where I believe we are now, brethren, I mean, there's a certain point where it just can't keep going on forever. And there's a certain point where when things are in gear and rolling, you don't stop them. But God has been able to allow them to go so far and then hold them up and watch us. And watch us after his end-time apostle Herbert Armstrong died to see what we would do. And sure enough, just like ancient Israel, some of us were stiff-necked and stubborn. Now, I'm not going to mention any names, but if the shoe fits, you got to wear it. There were some whom Mr. Armstrong said, now listen, you're not qualified to lead a church, so I don't want you shooting for that. I don't want you trying to put yourself in position for that, because I'm not going to put you there. And, you shouldn't be putting yourself there. And what does that person do after Mr. Armstrong dies? Within 6 years, they've already formed a corporation called a blankety-blank Church of God group, and he does basically nothing with it for 3 years. Then he starts a weekly radio program, and that's kind of low-key, and he continues, during all of that time, he continues to hang out. He may have been barred, as I was for a time, from meeting at headquarters because I was making too much noise, and I told, go over here. You can go to this congregation over in Glendora, while Pasadena was still the headquarters. You can go over there until they moved over to Glendora. Then, no, we're over here now. You can go back to Pasadena. And we're just making Pasadena a local congregation now. It's no longer headquarters. But while I was in Glendora, there was this other person I'm talking about, a minister. He was there. He would complain to me after services every week. They won't let me preach anymore, Stephen. And, he's talking about the new Pizzazz Boys. And we're talking about after Joe Tkach Sr. died, the Pizzazz Boys, the young ones. Joe Jr., they wouldn't let him preach anymore, he says. Well, I didn't know he had already formed this corporate thing. I used to hear him preach every Sabbath when he was minister in Los Angeles, where I went for a couple of years because where I lived at that time was under that geographical assignment, and I'd hear him preach week after week. In 1976 and 1977, for a couple of years, he preached Don't jump ship, brethren, no matter what happens. Don't jump ship. Wait for God. And I thought for sure as he would complain to me, they won't let me preach anymore. I thought, well, you'll remember your old sermons, that you preached week after week with intensity. Don't jump ship no matter what happens, brethren. Don't jump ship. Wait for God to show you where he's leading and what he's doing. Don't jump ship. And I didn't know the guy had already formed a corporation, and apparently in 1995 he had already begun a weekly radio broadcast. It was so low-key I wasn't even aware he was doing it, and I'd hear him complain, they won't let me preach anymore, Stephen. And I don't know what he was doing except, trying to round up sympathy. And I'm for you, Mr. Meredith. No, I didn't say any of that. I was thinking all along, every time he would say that, I was thinking, I should have said it to him. I didn't, because I thought he emphasized it and preached it so strongly. I thought, well, he would remember it himself. No matter what happens, don't jump ship. Wait for Christ. And so that's years later before I realized what he had done. But when I read the history and find out he had started that in 1992, and here we are in 1995, he's in this local congregation complaining they won't let me preach anymore. But you've already got this corporation formed called the Certain Church of God Group that you've had formed for 3 years, and nobody knows about it because you haven't announced it yet, except you got some board members, and they're all low-key with you at the moment. You start this weekly radio program, and then you wind up in trouble with those same people, and 3 years later, in 98, you form another group with another banana-peeling name. But here's the point, brethren, of what I'm saying that relates to this, that relates to these verses about the Lord not being slack concerning his promise, the way some men count slackness. The rest of that verse explains something that God is doing. He's saying that he's patient and long-suffering with us, not willing that any should perish. And for him, when he says, a day is as a year is as, he says a year is a, how does he say this? A day is as 1,000 years, and 1,000 years as a day. And God is not slack concerning his promise. With time being relative, and that's the main thing being said here at this point with the rest of the context. And sure, there's duality, and it means the other part about the 7,000-year plan in 7 days means that too. But in context, God is saying here that he's not slack concerning his promise, and because with him a day can be like 1,000 years, 1,000 years like a day, certainly 3 decades, 30 years compared to a day against 1,000 years, 30 years, nothing to God when it comes to the last part of that, where he says he's not willing that any should perish, but that all come to repentance. Now, the reason that's relative to you and me and important to us is because the rest of the world is not being judged now, but those called to the spring harvest, we are being judged now. For us, it's we make it now or that's it. There's no second chance. Now, if you make it close, but all but a little, and you're lukewarm and you get left behind, you still got a chance to make it by buying of God gold, tried in the fire, the fiery trial of martyrdom. That's for those left behind. But the emphasis should not, at this moment, be on that. That should, of course, in balance be mentioned, because some, even though they may try, some are going to miss the mark just because they fall short of the full doing of it. Some who may even spend a lot of time watching the events that relate to the first 4 seals that are active, which Christ was explaining between the first 4 seals and the 5th seal. Watch these first 4 that are active and are about to blossom, and they blossom when they become more frequent and more intense to the point where they are like the little bud on the limbs of a tree, where the branches become tender and the buds begin to blossom. Christ said, summer is nigh. He said, when these seals blossom, when they become more frequent, more intense, things become more devastating, know that the kingdom of God is near. And when you look at Luke 21:36, where he said, watch so that you can avoid what's going to happen next, all the things that are going to happen next, he was speaking in between the first 4 seals and the last 3 seals, between the 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, 6, 7, with the next one, number 5, the 5th seal, being the next major event in prophecy, the Great Tribulation. He's saying, watch these first 4 so that you can escape 5, 6, and 7. Great Tribulation, heavenly signs telling you we got one more year of Great Tribulation to go, and at the same time that last year is going to have God's wrath poured out along with the wrath of Satan and man in the 7th seal, year-long day of the Lord, with 7 trumpets, the first 4 being the first 4 winds of punishment by God upon the earth, and the last 3 being the 3 woes that God pours out upon mankind, with that 3rd woe being at the sound of the 7th trumpet, and 3rd woe being one and the same, same time. On that last trump, Christ brings with him the angel with the 7 vials, the 7 last plagues, and he pours those out as the 3rd woe. So, that's the timing on that. But before that, between the first 4 seals and the 5th seal, which is where we are right now in time, there is an opportunity to avoid the 5th, 6th, and 7th seal. And I used to wonder, when I would hear first-year Bible class, why the instructor rarely ever mentioned what Mr. Armstrong mentioned about Luke 21:36, how we could escape by watching and praying always. And he would emphasize being burned at the stake, or having your head cut off, or you be torn asunder, torn in half, maybe tortured a little bit first. I hate to hear that, but that would be not only the main emphasis, that would be all I can remember him ever mentioning. And I would often wonder, why aren't you not only mentioning but emphasizing the way our overall leader and the chancellor of the college and the head of the church emphasizes Christ's words in Luke 21:36, that if you watch these things, you can escape. If you watch these first 4 seals, you can escape the last 3. You can escape 5, 6, and 7. Why aren't you saying that in this class? Why are you telling us, that it's a good thing and be ready to be a martyr? God needs martyrs. Well, yeah, but there'll be plenty of people in line for that. At God's West Point College, we should be emphasizing for one another and those who would hear us preach or teach. We should be emphasizing the fact that, as God's end-time apostle Herbert Armstrong did, that you can escape the Great Tribulation and the day-long year of the Lord. You can escape those things by watching and praying always now, so that you're accounted worthy to escape that rough stuff. And it won't be a piece of cake. You're going to have to run from an army that the devil sends after you, just like ancient Israel had to do with Pharaoh's army chasing them even through the Red Sea. The devil, Revelation 12, starting at verse 14, going through 17, 18, 19, he sends a flood, an army after the woman, the modern day, latter days, this time today, after the woman who's accounted worthy to escape, the Philadelphia era. Satan sends an army after her, such that God's end-time apostle has foreseen that the only place on the face of the earth that is mentioned in the Bible as being outside the reach of the beast. Let me bring that in tight for a moment while I fix something in our shot here, brethren. And I need to bring this tight anyway so you can see the bottom part of this, where Edom is. In Daniel 11, verses 41-42, those of you who tune in with me on a regular basis, I mention that, I emphasize that often, that in Daniel 11, in the Bible, God mentions the only place on the face of the earth during the 5th seal, during the Great Tribulation, that is outside the reach of the beast, is this area you see right here. From at the south, the land of the children of Edom, just above that Moab, and just above that Ammon. And God mentions in Daniel 11, verses 41-42, that tri-regional wilderness area is the only place on the face of the earth during the fifth seal, during the Great Tribulation, during the time of the seventh king of Revelation 17, verse 10, which is that king that the Bible calls the beast, as we heard being talked about at the end of the 1985 Feast film in an animated and a very graphic way. That beast will have no reach on this land just east of the Jordan River, in the area of Jordan, from Ammon, Moab, down to Edom. And at the south part of Edom is Petra, and that mountain way there. Let me bring that back out for you again once here. You see Edom, and you see the mountains over to the left side of the screen. And that in that mountain way, it's not on the map here, but there's an area called Petra. It's kind of a suburb of Edom. It has high rock walls. I've been there and seen them myself. And when Mr. Armstrong was there, he foresaw that as similar, being very similar to ancient Israel going through the Red Sea, with God having gelled up the walls of the Red Sea like ice. And ancient Israel was able to march through there with Moses and escaped Pharaoh's army. Now, as Pharaoh's army was getting close with their chariots and all that, God opened up just a little bit of he let a little bit of the ice melt, enough to let some water flow down there on the ground and muddy it up, so that Pharaoh's army, the chariots of Pharaoh's army, would get stuck in the mud, and so their horses and their chariots wouldn't be able to overtake Moses and the Israelites up ahead of them there. And God was able to control that and let the mud area just be where the chariots and all were, and it slowed them down to a crawl. And so, Israel was up well enough ahead of them that even if the Pharaoh's army had started to run after them, they wouldn't have been able to catch up with them. And besides, once he slowed down their chariots, then God allowed Moses and ancient Israel to get on out of the Red Sea. And then with Pharaoh's army back there a ways back, he ungelled the walls of water and let them crash down on them. Well, Mr. Armstrong was able to see same scenario, since Satan is going to send a flood, an army after the woman in Revelation 12. The woman in prophecy is always picturing a church, and in this case the true church, and those who are accounted worthy to escape to this area that's the only protected area on the face of the earth during the Great Tribulation under the king of the north, the beast, the seventh king of Revelation 17:10. That's the only area on earth outside that reaches that beast reach, outside of his domain. He has no power over this area. It's protected, just like God protected ancient Israel with a pillar of the cloud by day and fire by night. He's going to protect this area. And at the entrance to that area, Petra, down at the south end there with Edom. I'll get my desk out of the way one more time so you can see Edom again. Right down there, south of Edom, is Petra, with the big rock walls. And Mr. Armstrong saw, wow, these big rock walls are kind of remind you of the story about the Red Sea and God gelling up those walls of the Red Sea like ice, creating a pathway through it for Israel to get through. Well, this is a small pathway through these rocks, these with the high rock walls. And if the church, the woman, the true church, those accounted worthy to escape, go through here, and Satan sends his flood, his army after them, well, God just does the same thing he did in the Red Sea. It says in Revelation 12, around verse 17 or so, God opens up the earth and swallows Satan's flood, his army. And I'm going to check myself real quick on exactly where that verse is, because I can just hear some of you rumbling around in your mind. Yeah, where is that verse? Well, it's Revelation 12, and it's verse 16, where God says, "And the earth helped the woman, and the earth opened her mouth and swallowed up the flood which the dragon," symbolic reference to the devil, "which the dragon cast out of his mouth." So there's symbolic language saying that Satan sends an army after the true church, those accounted worthy to escape, and God opens up the earth, similar to how he did with ancient Israel, letting the Red Sea crash in on them, and he opens up the earth on the army that Satan sends after the woman, the church, as she's escaping into this area here during the Great Tribulation for those 3.5 years. And then the rest of that story is worth mentioning, the fact that Satan becomes wroth with the woman after God has protected her and allowed her to get on in there, but not all the woman is there. God leaves behind those who are not counted worthy to escape. He gives criteria, 2 prerequisites of being accounted worthy to escape in Luke 21, verse 36, where he says, "Watch therefore and pray always," with the therefore referring back to the previous verse 35 of Luke 21, where God is saying that the Great Tribulation comes as a snare upon all them that dwell upon the face of the whole earth. In other words, it catches everybody off guard, including some of God's brethren. If you're not watching and praying always and accounted worthy, you won't even know the great eagle has come and taken away your camaraderie, those who were watching and praying. And yes, you were keeping the Sabbath and the holy days and studying and knew a lot and were part of God's church, yes, but you weren't following the instruction God gave fully. You weren't following what he said. Christ said do in Luke 21:36, to watch and pray always, all the time, with all your heart, soul, might, and mind. Even while you're working, be running the prayers through your head. Most important thing to you, seeing Christ return and caring about those affected by the calamities, the events related to the first 4 seals being played out in a more devastating way, more frequently, more intensely upon the world. And Christ says you do that so that you may be accounted worthy to escape. Selfish? Yeah, but it's a goal, a selfish goal that we are encouraged by Jesus Christ himself to have. Because now those of you that say, well, I want the greater thing, I want the greater honor of being a martyr, well, more power to you. But even Jesus Christ, the night before his crucifixion, was in such a state of anxiety, you could say his knees knocking, but more than that, the scriptures tell us that his sweat were as if it were blood, and as he asked his disciples to get up and pray with him, they just rolled over and snored some more. And the anxiety in him increased so much that he asked the Father, hey, Dad, Father, isn't there some way this cup could pass from me? Don't we have a plan B, another cup? Something else we could do? Realizing that, nope, that this is the way we planned it from the beginning, from the foundation. Christ said, not my will, yours be done. But somewhere in there, the scriptures tell us that the Father sent comforters to Christ. He sent angels. He sent angels to comfort Christ. And Christ himself is going to come to those left behind. He tells us in the 9 verses in Revelation 3, starting at verse 14, going through verse 22, the only verses related to the Laodicean era in the Bible. Just 9 verses. And the central verse in verse 18, there's 4 verses before it, 4 verses after it, all related to the Laodicean era. This verse right in the center, the central verse, verse 18, God is telling us, I counsel you, you who are of the Laodicean era left behind during that time of martyrdom, I counsel you to buy of me gold tried in the fire, the fiery trial of martyrdom, as God's end-time apostle has explained that fire. And so what God is saying is, you were lukewarm. He explains that in the first 4 verses, what lukewarm means, and saying I wish you were either hot or cold, but you were just lukewarm. You kept the Sabbath, you kept the holy days, and You la-di-da'd about it, though. Where I said, watch and pray always, you read it and said, yeah, I know that. But you didn't do it. And so Christ says, you thought you were rich and all this, and God says, nope, you didn't even recognize you were poor and blind, naked, miserable. To me, to God, you were. And that lukewarm attitude don't fly. It won't get you either into the place of protection, the place of safety, and it won't get you to be able to stand before the Son of Man in the first resurrection. And if you want to make the first resurrection, now that you've missed the escape, that hasn't come yet. I'm saying if we roll forward to that point in time that Christ is describing in Revelation 3, verses 14 through 22, if you get there and you weren't accounted worthy to escape, then Christ is coming to you and saying, I counsel you to buy of me gold tried in the fiery trial of martyrdom. This will then be your only way into the kingdom, is to buy that gold tried in the fiery trial of martyrdom. In other words, and Christ there after that, he says, now I want you to endure. When the beast says to you, work on the Sabbath, you need to endure and stick with your guns and say, no, I refuse. Even though the beast is saying, if you don't work on the Sabbath, we're going to kill you. And you're not going to compromise it. You're not going to say, well, I'll work an hour or two, and then I'll keep the rest of the Sabbath, and there we go. You just took the mark of the beast. You have to stand firmly, and Christ is saying, you got to be hot about it. Endure to the end, without compromise. Even though they're saying they're going to put you to death. And that's what you need. You need to buy of God gold tried in the fire of martyrdom to make the kingdom now, since you were left behind because of lukewarmness. You got to show enough hotness, enough strength of character to say, I am not working for even a minute of servile work on the Sabbath for you, Mr. Beast, even though you're going to kill me. And you don't have to say all those words. You just say, I'm not working. He'll do the rest of it for you. Okay, off with your head, or onto the stake and on with the fire. Or however they might decide to kill you. It's still going to be buying of God gold tried in the fire, the fiery trial of martyrdom. But, brethren, here's what I want to emphasize. More than that, you just be aware of that, what your penalty is if you blow it. If you blow being accounted worthy to escape. Now, you still can make the kingdom that way, yes, by buying of God gold tried in the fiery trial of martyrdom. And you wind up with white raiment, you wind up at the marriage supper. You are part of the first resurrection, the only resurrection that has the blessing of the marriage to Jesus Christ with it. Everybody else comes in as children, and they do not become part of the marriage. They become part of the family. But those who had that special calling and that were hot with it, either way, hot before the Great Tribulation or hot during it. Hot before it, being accounted worthy to escape, or not being accounted worthy to escape, hot during the Great Tribulation, such that you say, nope, I'm not working on the Sabbath even though you're going to kill me. And they will. They will kill you. If you're not in that place of protection. Oh, God can protect me anywhere. Yeah, but you will not have bought gold of God tried in the fire if you're somewhere else trying to be protected or hiding out. God says, buy of him gold tried in the fire. You need to put yourself forward for it even. Reveal yourself, because that's going to be the only way you're going to make it into the kingdom if you're left behind. Now, what I wanted to point out is that what Mr. Armstrong encouraged us was to watch and pray always and be accounted worthy to escape. That was a big ticket with him, a big item, a big thing he encouraged us to want and to do. In fact, when I asked him what should be our spirit, Mr. Armstrong, I've read your book, 7 Laws of Success. Some of that's related to physical goals, and of course bringing prayer into it, asking God to guide. But what should be our spiritual goals, aside from physical goal things? What should be our number one spiritual goal? And he said number one should be the first resurrection. And then he added, and number two, kind of like unto it, your second spiritual goal should be to want to be accounted worthy to escape. I was glad to hear Mr. Armstrong say that. He said that to me. 1, first resurrection. 2, be accounted worthy to escape. Now, in time order, it works the other way. First of all, in time order, we want to be accounted worthy to escape. Then we've got 3.5 years over there in that protected place where you're going to have Sabbath week after week, and ministers, and maybe 1 or 2 or both witnesses coming, and who knows what all God will do by inspiration or whatever with us during that 3.5 years of final training. So you're going to have some great final training for 3.5 years if you're counted worthy to escape. And so then, following that, 3.5 years after being accounted worthy to escape, then the second goal, and you can still blow it while you're over there. He doesn't do the sealing of the 144,000 until we've been there 2.5 years. And after the heavenly signs, the 6th seal, after the sign in the sun, the moon, the stars. Do I have that I could put up on the screen? Let's see if I can roll this forward. Oh no, I got to put that slide in among these. I got hymns here with that. Okay, I don't have that up at the moment. I don't have my seals I can pop on the screen, but I show them to you often. Many of you know first 4 seals, the 4 colored horses, and between that you got the 5th seal, the Great Tribulation, the 6th seal, the heavenly signs, the 7th seal, the 7 trumpets of the day of the Lord, the year-long day of the Lord, with the first 4 trumpets being the 4 winds, the last 3 trumpets being the 3 woes. But after the 5th seal, the Great Tribulation begins, 2.5 years into it, then the 6th seal, the signs in the sun, the moon, the stars, are displayed. And then following that, there's not a seal for it. It's in between the 6th seal and the 7th seal. It's in between the heavenly signs and the beginning of the day of the Lord, which God doesn't begin until he's had a half hour of silence in the heavens. And in between that 6th seal and that half hour and the 7th seal beginning, God seals the 144,000. That's the time order of events as you read Revelation. So 2.5 years after those accounted worthy to escape are in this place of protection in the Middle East, over in this tri-regional area in Jordan. Then, after 2.5 years of the Great Tribulation, then God does the sealing of the 144,000. So you'll have had 2.5 years of training week after week on the Sabbath, and if you don't get some kind of bad attitude or whatever and blow it, then you get the sealing in your forehead as part of the blessed 144,000. Then there's a year to go with the day of the Lord, and you're still in protection, but now you're sealed to be protected from what God pours out during the day of the Lord. And if you're not there and you don't have that sealing, then you're coming up. You're coming up when Christ returns as part of those who died in Christ. All right, that's the ball game. That's the plan God has. But the thing I want to encourage you, brethren, is and it's not easy, actually. You got to do the watching every day, because Christ says do it always. Watch and pray always. It always applies to both things, the watching and the praying. You watch the daily news and you pray always. What you saw last night, the next day you're just constantly praying about that in combination on your knees, and even as you're going about your daily routine, including your work. You keep praying in the back of your mind while you're working. You can do that. We're made where we can multitask. You can put your focus on your work, but you can mentally have your attitude and your mind attuned to praying about the current activities of the four seals and the people affected by them. That's the attitude God wants to see in us, brethren. So that we don't make a god out of anything in this world, so that, as he warns in verse 34 of Luke 21, be careful, take heed that you don't become overcharged with surfeiting, gluttony, or drunkenness, both physically and spiritually, or the cares of this world. And of course Luke 4:4 and Mark 4:4 applies. We live by every word of God. But for being adjudged whether you're going to be accounted worthy to escape or not, the criteria is in Luke 21:36. And what's interesting to me is that the fellow I was telling you about, who God told him, you're not qualified to lead the church, and so get that out of your head. He decided he was going to prove to Mr. Armstrong, I can too lead a church, and I got all these ministers in alignment under me. Watch what I can do, and they'll have the brethren, they'll all follow me in, and they'll love my personality, and boom, I'll do it. Well, what he did was help divide the church, because a lot of people went with him, and a lot of people did not go with him. And then a whole lot more other people went here, and there, all over the place. I'm laughing because, this is a days of the Feast of Tabernacles. We're supposed to be rejoicing, brethren. We can look at anything and, and still be rejoicing. But we go home, we take it seriously on our knees and say, hey, God, help me to be accounted worthy. Help me do what I need to do so that you will account me worthy without me even having to ask you that. If you do what he says do, his promise is he will account you worthy to escape. And that's a worthwhile doing. He wants you doing what you need to do to be accounted worthy to escape. It's not only not really selfish, it's selfish if you don't do what we need to do to be accounted worthy. That means if you don't do it, you're spending the time God is asking you to spend watching and praying. You're doing something else that God's saying, I don't want you doing all that other stuff. I want you watching and praying. And so your obedience earns it for you. And your obedience has you spending your time doing what God wants you to do. And that means sacrificing your time. So in that sense, you're overcoming selfishness by sacrificing time you would spend on selfish interest. And if you want to consider it selfish, as some people accuse us who want to be accounted worthy to escape and do what Christ said do, well, let them call you selfish. Be selfish about it. And if you're truly doing it, you're going to be doing a lot of sacrifice, a lot of watching, a lot of praying, because God says pray always, all the time, with all your heart, soul, might, and mind. That's heavy duty, brethren. That's heavy duty. That's a big, that's a big chore. That's a big thing to do. And even after I preach it, I have to get on my knees sometimes and then fast and say, God, help me to spend the time praying that I am encouraging others to do, so that I'm doing what I preach, and that I'm doing, as I ask others to do, what you told us through Christ we should be doing at this time. And so if some of you scratching your head saying, what should we be doing while we're scattered? The answer is Luke 21:36. It's right there in that one verse. That's what you need to be spending your time doing right now. Christ and the Father have done a work through Herbert Armstrong that has not ended, because they have preserved his work on a new open door, the medium of the internet, the World Wide Web. And thanks to some of you, the work that God did through Mr. Herbert Armstrong is preserved, and people can Bing it or Google it or some other internet search and find hits in milliseconds of publications that Mr. Armstrong wrote, of sermons he gave, Bible studies, radio broadcast, television broadcast. Boom, they're on the internet, available for everyone, even the church services and the Bible studies, which initially were only available to those called into the church. Now they're God's got them preserved here on the internet for everybody and anybody whom he might want to call. Now, how do we best deal at this time, brethren, with those who grew up in the church who are deciding, since they have the 1 Corinthians 7 option that we saw Mr. Armstrong talking about in one of the behind-the-work films during this feast that we played, they're not cut off from God the way the rest of the world is, and yet they have to seek it and want it from God. He's not just going to cram it down your throat. You grew up in the church, you're not cut off, but you don't just automatically get it. You got to ask God to give it to you. You say, I see it, Father, I know where your church is, and I see what you're doing, and I want to be a part of it. And now, there are those whom God might call now who did not grow up in the church and who want to know, what are we doing here? Where is your church? Where God's putting it on their mind and drawing them. But brother, what are we collectively as the body of Christ? Because the body of Christ is one body, one church. It's not a building. It's not an organization. When we were one collectively, yes, through our leader, we formed a corporation who God inspired to cover holding assets and legal paying taxes and things, to be organized in the doing of the things that the world requires, and for having a corporate structure, having a distinction over it by the adjective that was used with it. Well, that was fine when we were one body, because we only had one corporate representation of the Philadelphia era of God's church. Now that we're scattered, and not only scattered with God's allowance is an okay thing when he's testing us, but for us to form divisions, that's causing God to say, some of you are flunking the test. That's not what I wanted you to do. I don't like this division where you guys over here think you're it, these guys over here think they're it, and the twain shall not meet. We got our ministers, you got yours. And it's not just two like that, even though there's two big ones, maybe 3, 4 big ones. Then there's dozens and dozens and hundreds of smaller sized ones. Beep, 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 beep. Little banana peelings wrapped around their bananas. Bananas being us, the members and ministers that allow themselves to be put in this peeling or that peeling, depending on who the head of that banana peeling group is. And in some cases, they decide, well, we're going to vote so that we don't have what happened with the Koches, where they went where they went into apostasy on us. So, brethren, what do we collectively do with people that God calls in anew? Because we need fellowship. So how are we going to cover, and weekly people we have weekly Sabbaths so that we don't forget things. Like the reminder about Luke 21:36, to be watching during the week and praying. That's a good reminder every Sabbath to have placed on you. And if you're someplace where they tell you, you don't need to worry about that, it didn't work under Mr. Armstrong anyway, see, he died 30 years ago and Christ hasn't returned. There's actually a minister out there saying that, so I'm not just making that up. That some would do that. And some, even though they may not say it as that one minister expressly said it, they may, in other words and by their attitude, be saying it, by saying, just be ready to be killed. And they don't tell you, watch and pray so that you can be accounted worthy to escape. They are preaching a Laodicean, what's the word I want to use there? Ticket or their way. They're just saying, just go the Laodicean way. Brethren, some people, when they get to that road where they're facing the beast who says, work on the Sabbath or we're going to kill you, are going to compromise. Some, where they could have said, yeah, I can do the watching and praying always now if they'd have been encouraged to. So some of you ministers are, you're putting a shackle around your head. I hate to be in your shoes when you have to answer to Christ about how you treated brethren and how he's going to call you on the carpet for failing to encourage them. We're to teach as we were taught. Mr. Armstrong taught us. Be watching and praying, brethren. Be accounted worthy to escape. And those of you who are not following that, Titus 1 verse 9, hold fast to what you were taught and teach as you were taught. You're going to have to answer to Christ for the blood of those who you caused to stumble. So if any of you are ministers who are doing that and somebody guides you to come hear these words, or they record it for you and snip it out, send it over to you, I'd hate to be in your shoes when you have to answer that question before Jesus Christ. I'd be shaking in my boots right now to even think about that I failed to encourage brethren to be following the instruction of Jesus Christ in Luke 21:36, to be watching and praying always. That's what we should be doing now that we're scattered. God's got it in check. He doesn't need either competition or duplication of the work he did through his end-time apostle Herbert. He's got that preserved on the internet. It's available in milliseconds for people who want it. When the beast comes, the internet's going to be cut off. That'll become a time of a famine of the hearing of the Word of God. Let me see if I got a slide I can pop up on the screen. I think I can put... I can zoom in on one of these slides. Let's go in on that slide, and we'll finish up here, brethren, for today on the fifth day. Going on this slide with the crown of the Holy Roman Empire pictured and labeled at the top, Great Tribulation. This is the time of the fifth seal. When the fifth seal opens, it opens with the Great Tribulation. It starts the clock for the 3.5 years before Christ returns on the seventh trump of the seventh seal. This being the fifth seal, the Great Tribulation. There's basically 7 elements to this fifth seal. One is the Great Tribulation itself, the worst time of trouble since the beginning of the world to this time that's coming, no nor ever after, as Christ said in Matthew 24, verse 20, 21, 22, one of those in there. Let me take a quick look for you before we mention the other 6 elements of this seal. Matthew 24, verse 21 says, For then shall be great tribulation, such as was not since the beginning of the world to this time, no nor ever shall be. And except those days, verse 22, be shortened or cut short, there should no flesh be saved alive. At the beginning of this 3.5 years of great tribulation, there will be a famine of the Word of God. The beast is going to cause the internet to be greatly limited, restricted, if not totally shut down. He is going to cut off access, any access to recordings of Mr. Armstrong's Bible studies, sermons, broadcasts are going to be gone. Any links to his publications are going to be gone. It'll be the time of 2 witnesses, yes, but it'll be a famine of the Word of God for the public at large. It'll be the time of the martyrdom of God's saints, and those who are not accounted worthy to escape or who are left behind will be told to work on the Sabbath or you'll be killed. And Christ again saying in verse 18 of Revelation 3, I counsel you to buy of me gold tried in the fire. The fiery trial of martyrdom applies to you if you're left behind to face the beast during this great tribulation. It's the time of round 3 of World War. Looking over on the right side toward the top, you see in red it says World War III. This will be, I got 3 rockets coming out of the crown of the Holy Roman Empire. This is an actual picture of the crown of the Holy Roman Empire. I put the 3 rockets in there flying out to represent round 3 of World War. And at the beginning of this, right at the opening, God's end-time apostle Herbert has explained to us right at the beginning of the Great Tribulation, the beast will fulfill what God prophesied through Ezekiel in chapter 6 and verse 6, where he said, if especially to the modern-day 2 sons of Joseph, Ephraim in the UK, Manasseh in the United States, if you do not repent, then all of your cities will be laid waste. That's a prophecy for these latter days, because before the invention of the hydrogen bomb, which takes the animal bomb to trigger it, it wasn't possible to destroy entire cities, which now can be done overnight. Well, in a moment, boom, a few missiles, the job is done. 1/3 of the people die on direct hit. Another third die from the fallout. And then when you really get out into the country areas, the third that remain alive, but they're going to be ghastly sick from it all, the dust in the air, the radiation, they're going to be taken captive overseas, and many of them will die in captivity, naked and unfed, just like in the Holocaust. But as God's end-time apostle explained, the hairs in the skirt of Ezekiel represent about 10% of the total population. So say of 7 billion total population, you'll have about 700 million people living on over into this time that this week of the Feast of Tabernacles pictures, the millennium. It'll start with about 700 million people being left alive into it. Now, those of you who are left behind, I wouldn't count on living on over into the world tomorrow, because God says, I counsel you to buy of me gold tried in the fire. They're going to require you to work on the Sabbath or be killed. And Christ says, because you were lukewarm, you need to do this. Now, the beginning of the Great Tribulation, this is the time when Philadelphia is flown to the wilderness. The Philadelphia church, those who are accounted worthy to escape, are flown to that place I showed you on the map. That's described in Daniel 11, verses 41-42, the land of the children of Ammon, Moab, and Edom. That tri-wilderness area east of the Jordan River, from the Sea of Galilee down to the Dead Sea, all protected from the beast, where Philadelphia church is flown. And then the bottom, it says, Laodicean era of martyrdom commences. And that Laodicean era, as God's end-time apostle explained it, brethren, does not begin until Philadelphia is taken to the place of protection. Those are the words of our end-time apostle. God has not brought along a new apostle to change that doctrine, that teaching. That doctrine is a doctrine of the church inspired by God. Those who try to claim otherwise, saying, wow, Mr. Armstrong died. Well, so have Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, Peter, Paul, Thomas, Bartholomew, all the rest of the disciples. And all the prophets, too. They've all died. So what are we going to do? Take God's word and toss it out the window over our shoulders? Forget it? No. This word is still alive. And God's inspired words through his end-time apostle Herbert are still alive. Yes, he thought that Christ would return sooner than later, as did the early apostles. And so he would make statements without pinning down any exact date, time, and hour, that he thought Christ should return in such and such a time. Well, 2 Peter 3, verse 8 says, time to God, a day is as 1,000 years, 1,000 years as a day. So if Mr. Armstrong says Christ is going to return within 20 years, multiply that 20 years times 360 days each year times 1,000. He's got himself at least 20,000 years flexibility there, since he made a prophetic statement. You know, so give us a break. Now, we can see when things are coming soon. And it's in the Father's control. Mr. Armstrong, before 1972, for a year and a half, while I was in college, he was pounding away and emphasizing, brethren, those ministers out there who are teaching, because of misunderstanding what I wrote in the booklet called 1975 in Prophecy, and because of some things even that Herman Hay had espoused, and other ministers that were thumping 72 and we're through, Mr. Armstrong was saying, that's definitely not going to be when we go. For a year and a half, he was saying, that's definitely not the time we're going, because of all the preaching saying that's when we would go. Because God says no man knows the day or the hour, and because of all those nuts out there preaching that 72 and we're through, that's not going to be the time we go, he said. So he had the balance. He also had the urgency put on him to think that it would be sooner than later. But, you know, brethren, don't let that throw you off where we are today, where it may genuinely be a lot sooner than later. Well, that statement's always true. It's going to be sooner than later. It's going to be sooner now than it was ever before, or at least that statement's correct and true. But it may be very soon. And some who've gotten used to the fact that, well, we thought it was going to be very soon 35 years ago. If you relax because of that attitude, you know, well, look, 35 years have passed. We'll probably have another 35 years. I don't think so. You better wake up. You better wake up and be watching it, because now these seals are truly becoming more frequent, more intense, more devastating. And we just had another thing pass through, and many brethren have been praying because the Feast of Tabernacles are here, and many brethren were down on the Gulf coast of Alabama and Florida, and thankfully God had mercy. Even though they were supposed to, even late into the game, get a lot of boom. But, you know, I haven't been able to follow a lot of it because my internet's been going on and off. And some of the web pages won't cycle back up because the internet must be rather spotty at the moment, and it's not working like it normally does. Thankfully, we were able to get out this morning without any power interruption like I've been having since yesterday up till this morning. So we made it through the 5th day, brethren. And email I got from Jay. Thank you very much, Jay. I appreciate those words. And I want to just send a reply on the email. I'm a little piled up. And as of yesterday, my internet kept going on and off. It was very, very frustrating. And I could download some email, and then the internet would be off, and I wouldn't be able to reply or answer. And that's thrown me a little bit behind. But we're still having a great feast, and like Randy Dick pointed out in the feast film yesterday when he was giving the pep talk to the campers who would go on the 3-day canoeing trip from Orr, Minnesota, up into the Canadian waters in the Canada area. As he said to them, he said, if you do run into some adversity, he says, check your attitude. He says, you can make it good or bad, all depending on the attitude you take. He said, he said, the groups who go out and run into the greatest adversity, when they keep their attitude right, they come back as the group having had the best time and having bonded more than any others. So, brethren, there's a certain adversity that, if we stay close to God, will bond us together more than ever. Maybe God will do something to break up all this division and to break up those who are teaching Laodicean style. Be ready to be a martyr. Man, come on, teach your people as Christ spoke in Luke 21:36. Watch and pray always, and be accounted worthy, so that you can be accounted worthy to escape this great tribulation, this worst time of trouble since the beginning of the world to this time coming, no nor ever after, as Christ put it. Matthew 24, verse 21. You can avoid that, brethren, by watching and praying always now. Two, I won't say simple prerequisites, but it simply is 2 prerequisites. Now, those 2 things take a lot from you. They take a lot of commitment and a lot of doing. To watch every day? All right, now I help you out with a program called World Watch. We put on for an hour 5 nights a week, Sunday through Thursday. After the feast, we'll be cranking back up again. I'm just maybe 10 programs short of having hosted that program 1,000 times since the death of its initial host, who did a couple of 100 programs, Robert Collins. He wanted me to keep it going. He ordained me for that and into the ministry of Christ and whatever Christ would direct me to do. And he warned and told me that Christ is probably going to require, God's going to require a lot more out of you now, Stephen. Be aware and watchful for that. And he gave me an opportunity if I wanted to say, I don't want this, take it off of me. And had somebody come over and explain that actually happened in one case. Some guy was ordained. He told him, I don't want to be ordained. I just want to be part of the regular membership. And they said, hey, don't worry, no problem. We will we will undo that burden from you. So, God's not unfair with us. If we don't watch something, he's not going to put it on us. But I wasn't going to be a Jonah, and I have been, I had to admit, as my dad even noticed, I've been a Jonah since, I had the opportunity of 3.5 years college before a sabbatical, some 40 years ago. And or 30 years ago, well, however long ago, years ago, back in 70. Yeah, it's 45 years ago. Yeah, old dude here. But Mr. Armstrong was in good shape into his 92nd, 93rd years. 94th year got rough, got old age cool on him. But so I'm nowhere near that. Should have some good life left in me here. Hopefully enough, brethren, for those of you who tune in here and appreciate the encouragement I try to give you, and it's encouragement to me too, to do what I ask you to do, which is what Christ is asking us to do, that God's end-time apostle preached and supported. And so, following the instruction into the ministry in Titus 1 verse 9 to hold fast and to teach as we were taught. Brethren, that's what I'm trying to do, and I hope it's encouraging to you. I've heard from some of you that say, Steve, thank you. And keep it up. And brethren, I appreciate it when you do your prayers for me, because I'm human. I'm in the same boat you are. I have to fight that same devil that Christ will be putting away, that the last Holy Day pictured his putting away Christ, which requires a strong man, both emotionally and physically, because Satan, though a spiritual being, is much more stronger than a physical being. And that's going to be a huge, big job for Jesus Christ, but he is qualified for it. Still, though, it's going to have emotional impact upon Christ, because Christ was right there with the Father as they created that being as one of the most beautiful, as the bright morning star, Lucifer, great music maker. And then how sad and shocking it was when he turned on them and became as if it were a Frankenstein monster. And even though Christ qualified to usher in and restore God's kingdom by conquering Satan in the supreme battle for world rulership some 2,000 years ago, they left him on the throne for a purpose, to fulfill that 7-day week, 7,000-year thing, with the first 6,000 being the days of man and Satan. And then the strong man, Christ, will put him away. That comes 9 days after Christ's return, based on the Holy Day calendar, with Christ's return being on the first day of the 7th month, with him putting away Christ 9 days later on the 10th day of the 7th month. It's only 9 days from the 1st to the 10th. What does Christ do between the 10th and the 15th? Those 5 days between Atonement and the Feast of Tabernacles? The only thing I can find in the Bible related to that is the high priest, when he took away that second goat, the one that the lot was cast to be the Azazel, the one representing the devil, not the scapegoat, but the scapegoat, the one that's set free in the desert, which, relates to the devil being set free in the bottomless pit. He's restricted from mankind. He's cut off. But the high priest, after he would touch that goat representing the devil, he had to come back and wash and bathe himself and wash his clothes. And so that's picturing you having come in contact with something very, very dirty. And that's a shadow of what's to come. That's a symbolic picture. And so Christ, having touched that devil, that being turned to sin, representing all sin and being the epitome of evil, the devil, Christ having had to touch him, having had to strong arm him, and all the demons go with him. So then they're all not just following, and even the devil's not. Christ isn't going to say, "Go, devil," and the devil just goes. He's going to have to take him off that throne. The devil is not going to go freely. He's going to put up a big fight. And so Christ is going to come back emotionally, again, because he helped create that being. He loved him. It was like if one of your animals got rabies and turned mad, or some of your neighbors, people, they love their animal, even after it turns mad. And they may have to put it to death. They still have a love for it. And it's the saddest thing in the world to have to put to death an animal you loved. And if you can think of that in terms of Christ having to take Satan, who was Lucifer, that he helped create, a being they loved like people love an animal that becomes part of their family. There's going to be that same emotion when Christ has to take that being off the throne of this earth and cast him into, stuff him into the bottomless pit and close the door on him. And all his demons there with him for the next 1,000 years. Christ is going to come back. From that, immediately after that, he's going to be emotionally depleted, physically depleted, probably very similar to how he felt when the woman touched the hem of his skirt when he was here in the flesh, and he said, "Who touched me?" And the woman, like, "I did it. I believe that if I just touched the hem of his skirt, I could be healed." And Christ said, "Well, I knew somebody did because I felt an essence go out of me." And her healing was so needful of much that a lot went out from Christ. He's going to feel like that multiplied many times over after he's had to take Satan off the throne of this earth and strong-arm him into the bottomless pit. So he may need those 5 days fully for recovery. If there's some spiritual place he can go where there's a hot tub and somebody to massage all that out of him, the angels singing to him, we may not see him for 5 days between Atonement and the Feast of Tabernacles, brethren, unless that happens to also be the time of the marriage supper. Maybe God will have Christ recover from that in a day or two, then we'll have... Somebody asked the question the other day, what's going to happen? Well, we know Christ has got to clean up. The high priest pictures that, having had to bathe himself and clean his clothes after taking the Azazel goat into the desert. And since there's 5 days in there, you got to ask the next question. Well, when after Christ's return is the marriage supper going to be? Well, when he returns, he's coming back with 7 vials to pour out the 7 last plagues that are the third woe. So that's happening when he first comes back, and then he's taking Satan off of his throne. So the first time there's a relaxation period for maybe the marriage ceremony, maybe that's going to be the first time there's some relaxation for that between Atonement and the beginning of the Feast of Tabernacles, which would make sense because we should be starting the Feast of Tabernacles, the millennium, the reign and rule with Christ on his throne as his wife. We need to have that marriage ceremony. The father needs to give away the bride. We're probably going to have a rapture between the Atonement and Tabernacles. Now somebody's going to say, Gilbert's out there preaching some new thing now. No, I'm not. Look, the idea of the rapture probably came from that part of the Bible that says we're going to have the marriage ceremony. Where we're going to have it? We're going to have it. The Father's not coming down here. Christ is going to take us up there for the marriage supper. God's going to have that planned out for us real nice. He is going to give us away. Nobody else can give us away to Christ but the Father. And he himself's probably going to conduct the marriage ceremony. And so we got to go to him. He's not coming down here to us for that, brethren. So that's probably going to be just a few days up there for the marriage ceremony, and day or two of partying. A day may be like 1,000 years. It may seem like a nice long time for us. Wow, we got a great honeymoon up here in heaven at God's throne. And then we're back here to start the job of helping Christ reign and rule on his throne, teaching the people, being assigned cities and all that good stuff. All right, those are my thoughts on it. Now, I'm not preaching something new. All that's relative to things God's telling us he's going to do with us. It's just, some of you want to know about the timing. That's most likely time for it. Such that that's what I think it'll be. But I'm just throwing all my cards on the table, that is God's prerogative, and like, well, some things we don't know till we get there. So, but we do know that between atonement and tabernacles, Christ has got to clean up. He's got to bathe, and, the thing about cleaning the clothing, like, Christ has become totally dirtified after having had to take the devil, Satan, off the throne of this earth and put him in the bottomless pit. So he's going to be cleaning up in between. All right, that's one thing we know. Brethren, I better sign off. Thank you for joining me today. We'll do another feast film tomorrow. I think the one we had today, I don't want to take away from it. That one that we had today was just absolutely outstanding. And the church became a worldwide work in 1953. I think we can still make a generic reference to the one church, all of us collectively being a worldwide church, God's doing. And he is going to regather us. Those who are accounted worthy to escape will be regathered as he takes us to that place in the photograph I showed you, the tri-regional area of Ammon and Moab and Edom and Jordan, east of the Jordan River. That's the only place on the face of the earth that's going to be protected from the beast during the Great Tribulation, those 3.5 years before Christ returns. And we'll all be together then, those accounted worthy to escape. And then those that who are not accounted worthy, who go through the martyrdom, we'll see you at the marriage supper. And we'll see you at the resurrection of Jesus Christ. And if Tom Williams has his way, we'll have God bringing somebody along to regather everybody now. But Tom and I are of a different opinion on that. We don't fisticuff on it, but we're just different opinion. I don't think we're going to be regathered until until the Father sends the great eagles for us, the two wings of a great eagle, which may be modern aircraft that symbolically we fly on to the Middle East, probably dropped off somewhere in Israel, just below the mountains. We'll have to be chased, run through the mountains, and be chased by an army Satan sends after us into Petra, and then God causes the rocks of Petra to fall in on that army, Revelation 12, verse 16, 17. And I think that's the next time we're going to be gathered. But I may be wrong. Tom Williams, who worked in letter answering for more than a decade, since he graduated from Big Sandy in 1973, I will defer to Tom if God decides to go ahead and regather us. But the reason I don't see it is because there are too many ministers who set up their banana peeling blankety blank this or blankety blank that Church of God groups who would not want to relinquish their headship over their group here or their group there or their multi-group over here with their vote for their top president guy, and yet their board of director council of elders control him. He doesn't control them. They actually control him. He has to do what they say, or he's out. Or any other group where ministers, created another one of those hundreds of names of banana peeling adjectives. The adjective is the banana peeling of the parts of speech. That's why I say banana peeling Church of God groups. They've all put a different adjective in front of Church of God. To times 100. How they come up with that many different names is beyond. They have to really do some thinking and investigating if you're going to start a new group now. Hey, did somebody already take this name? Which is just division. That's all it is division. God is doing the work he started through Herbert Armstrong through the preserved writings and recordings of Mr. Armstrong. We don't need to compete with it. We don't need to duplicate it. It is as if God were speaking through Herbert Armstrong from the grave now, because of having preserved those things And he, having finished the work he had for Mr. Armstrong to do, going before kings and princes, that's been done. Now the two witnesses will do something similar, so there will be a repeat, and the two witnesses may even include a resurrection of God's end-time apostle Herbert as Zerubbabel type, finishing the work he started to him. That's what Jeff, over at a graduate out of Bricket Wood, thinks. Jeff's got some scriptures supporting that, and Jeff could be right, but that's God's option. None of them say God has to do it that way, but it definitely is an option. So don't be surprised if on this program someday you don't actually see Mr. Armstrong, instead of in a recording where God sent me over to him and say, here's Mr. Armstrong live, just coming out of his grave in Altadena. I don't know, brother, just having some fun with you on this fifth day. We're 700 and something years now into the millennium. By multiplying the fifth day times 143, with 7 days of Feast of Tabernacles, each day represents about 143 years into the millennium. So by this point, we're a good 700 years into the millennium. We've got 300 years to go. We've got tomorrow, the 6th day, Tuesday, and then Wednesday we've got the 7th day of the Feast of Tabernacles, and Wednesday night and Thursday until sunset is another annual Sabbath, is another holy day. Wednesday night, sunset, begins a holy day. The last day of the Feast of Tabernacles, the 7th, let me rephrase that, the 7th day of the Feast of Tabernacles is not a holy day. It's the 8th day, which is a whole nother feast in and of itself, but it's adjoined to the Feast of Tabernacles, so we often call it the 8th day of the feast. Wednesday night, Thursday, the last great day of the feast, will be our next holy day. But we'll be back here tomorrow, God willing, and Nate seems to be well past us now, I think, other than leaving behind a lot of humidity. And if the internet's on, we'll plan to be back with you for the 6th day of the Feast of Tabernacles tomorrow at 10 o'clock Central, 11 o'clock Eastern, 3 o'clock in the afternoon in the United Kingdom, 8 a.m. on the East Coast, but you can watch it anytime in the archive. Those are the live stream times for tomorrow and the rest of the feast for the Feast of Tabernacles, 6th day, 7th day, and last great day. Brethren, thank you for joining me today. I hope you enjoyed that feast film video. There's the wonderful airplane that God blessed the work with, that Mr. Armstrong was able to fly around to visit kings and princes and people in positions for a possible revision of the Holy Roman Empire. As we saw one of the sons of the Hapsburgs that he interviewed in this film today. If you missed it, go back and watch that. This was an outstanding one today. All right, brethren, until tomorrow, have a happy rest of the feast day for the 5th day. Go out and fellowship up and enjoy some of the finest stuff you want to eat. I'm going to see if I can get some ice cream and cherries and chocolate and something really fabulous and take it over for Kat in the nursing home in Midfield. All right, brethren, that's it for today. Hope you get some good fellowship, some wonderful rejoicing and doing the things your heart lusts for, whatever it is to eat, as long as it's legal now, Of course, I don't even need to say that, brethren. We'll see you tomorrow. Thanks for joining me today. Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth. Till next time, happy feast.